Could prolonged oil during a US-Iran war, defensive. How are Asian energy
in base? How could the US-Iran? During a US-Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the most critical energy choke point.
What role does geography play in the Strait of Hormuz during a US-Iran war crisis? Why would the US-Iran war make the Strait of Hormuz the center of global economic attention?
Why are global energy markets highly sensitive to developments in the US-Iran war?
Plus World. In the narrow Strait of Hormuz, a vital artery for global energy, tensions simmer. Tensions simmer.
A US-Iran conflict could have devastating consequences for global commodity markets, particularly oil.
What historical tensions led to the current US-Iran war scenario around the Strait of Hormuz? How have military escalations intensified risks in the US-Iran war?
The Persian Gulf's strategic importance in any US-Iran conflict lies in its critical oil choke points, notably the Strait of Hormuz.
How could naval confrontations expand during the US-Iran war?
Control over these vital shipping lanes means influence over global energy supplies and trade routes. Any conflict here could disrupt about a fifth of the world's oil. The Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point. Approximately 20% of global oil supply passes through here.
Why would crude oil availability shrink rapidly during the US-Iran war?
Rempids. How would global refineries respond to disruptions caused by the US-Iran war?
Why could oil prices surge above $100 during the US-Iran war?
How does fear alone during the US-Iran war push crude oil markets higher?
What makes oil futures extremely volatile during the US-Iran war? How would sustained tension in the US-Iran war increase gasoline prices globally?
Why are energy investors closely monitoring developments in the US-Iran war?
In base. How could the US-Iran war accelerate global inflation through rising fuel costs?
How might central banks react to oil-driven inflation caused by the US-Iran war? This is a critical question facing global economies.
How would emerging markets struggle during prolonged US-Iran war tensions?
Could the US-Iran war push fragile economies toward recession?
How might business investment decline due to uncertainty in the US-Iran war?
वापस के कुछ कंट्रोल से कैंपर से तेजी जाता है। स्टेबलिंग अब इमेज एक्टिव है। आवाज़ है कम से 20% पेस्ट करती है। अब
How does the US-Iran war impact airline and shipping industries?
Could household budgets shrink due to the US-Iran war energy shock? Why are consumers the first to feel economic pressure during the US-Iran war?
Kasi kap idzais tepkwan poplos ke ab anse marku gए हैं Okso batis ab sub degaw ka brisata se kwese paho katiye us sadens.
Why do investors shift to gold and safe haven assets during the US-Iran war? Tensions escalate. US-Iran conflict feared. Markets react.
Which sectors benefit financially during the US-Iran war crisis? War risk insurance premiums would spike during a US-Iran war due to the increased perceived danger to shipping in critical oil transport regions like the Strait of Hormuz.
Buildings a giant event. And everybody of Australia got those you can so go with again. And go on will say.
What supply chain disruptions might follow an escalation in the US-Iran war?
How could retailers suffer from higher import costs during the US-Iran war?
Why might global trade slow down during the US-Iran war?
How does the US-Iran war threaten just-in-time delivery systems worldwide?
How are Asian energy importers vulnerable during the US-Iran war? A US-Iran conflict could significantly disrupt long-term gas supply contracts, leading to price volatility. And why are Asian economies most exposed to supply shocks during the US-Iran war?
How could the US-Iran war force countries to tap strategic petroleum reserves?
How does the US-Iran war reshape global energy alliances?
Why is energy security a top concern during the US-Iran war?
Are there realistic pipeline alternatives if the US-Iran war closes Hormuz?
Transcription. Why can't bypass routes fully compensate during the US-Iran war?
Could the US-Iran war expose weaknesses in global oil transport systems?
What strategic vulnerabilities are revealed by the US-Iran war? Could inflation from the US-Iran war force interest rate hikes? How might central banks balance growth risks during the US-Iran war?
US-Iran war-induced oil volatility creates a trilemma.
Indeed, balancing inflation control, economic growth, and
During geopolitical conflicts like the US-Iran tensions, investors flock to gold as a safe haven asset, seeking stability amid
A US-Iran conflict triggers significant currency market volatility. Investors seek safe haven currencies, causing the dollar and yen to strengthen.
During a US-Iran war, defensive investment strategies typically involve shifting towards assets like gold, oil, and defense industry.
The US-Iran war significantly heightens oil speculation due to fears of supply disruptions from the critical Middle East region.
the Glak-the-Stalinist. How would the US-Iran war impact Iran's own economy?
The United Nations could play a critical role in de-escalating tensions and facilitating dialogue between the US and Iran.
जिससे कि स्पेड में बहुत कर रहे भारत को पार पाई जाता है दक्कर के टॉक्सिक ये अग्नि बॉम्बे से गुजरता है किधर के साहिनी के रिफ्लेस.
Would peace negotiations be possible during the US-Iran war?
Could prolonged oil shocks from the US-Iran war trigger a global recession?
How does consumer confidence decline during the US-Iran war?
When we look at potential economic risks stemming from a US-Iran conflict, historical oil crises offer some parallels.
What lessons about energy dependence emerge from the US-Iran war?
The global markets are already reacting. We need to stabilize oil prices immediately.
Iran is prepared to discuss de-escalation if sanctions are lifted.
Preventing escalation in the US-Iran conflict is crucial for global economic stability. Heightened tensions disrupt vital oil shipping routes.